So I'm speaking today about the Cancer Ingress 2020, and this is something that is important for the summer because when the sun ingresses into Cancer, it kicks off the summer season. Astrologers look to the sun's ingress into Aries to really speak for the quality of the full year, and then the sun's ingress into Cancer for the summer, Libra for the fall, and Capricorn for the winter. And so the rest of the talk will be about the Cancer Ingress and what that might mean for the summer for the United States. This is actually going to be looking at the Cancer Ingress for Washington, D.C. So I want to remind you that Claudius Ptolemy, the ancient astrologer, the king of astrologers, right, the most popular astrologer in history, and also the father of mundane astrology, because his writings on mundane astrology are some of the few we have from the ancient world. And they were followed by most later astrologers and built upon by later astrologers in the medieval period. But he tells us here that in Tetrabiblos Book 2 that we look to the Cancer Ingress. And he also says we look to the syzygy before the ingresses for additional information. But this is where this all comes from. The first thing that I want to note is that Mars overcomes the moon within 2-degree minutes applying. Let me say that again, within 2-degree minutes. I mean, this is as tight as you get for an applying aspect. And so it's shockingly tight. And it's kind of the signature feature of the chart. With Mars ruling the ascendant, it becomes even more underscored or undergirded by the chart. The moon is the people, Mars is violence. And Mars also rules the first house of the people as well as the sixth house of health. And so it's connecting the health of the people because of the house rulership of Mars, but also because Mars overcomes from this really tight applying square the moon. And before I go into what those features might mean, I just want to remind everyone that the pre-ingress syzygy, this was the lunar eclipse on the 5th of June, had this extremely tight relationship to Mars as well. The moon, the sun, and Mars were forming a T-square, all within the same degree, 15 degrees of their respective signs. And so the whole summer, if we look to the pre-ingress syzygy or the ingress itself, has this very martial quality and this heavy martial influence. And I think we all can acknowledge what we have seen. Violence has exploded across America with protests. You know, Mars is passion, Mars is rage, Mars is, the violence. And, the LA Times has reported that the LAPD has just kind of thrown off some of its reforms over the past few years to enact violence on protesters. And the images that have come out in the last couple of weeks, it's just every day there's these shocking images of police oppression and violent protests, or protests that then get responded to by violence from the police. And so this pre-ingress syzygy, or this lunar eclipse in Sagittarius, and the Cancer Ingress are both pointing to this strong martial flavor. And we're seeing that manifest in reality. These kind of things we call it on Twitter, astrologer good. There's a hashtag called astrologer good. And really it means that when the symbolism of the astrology really lines up to reality, for astrologers, we think that's a good thing. Obviously on the ground, dealing with this raw martial manifestation, it's not a good thing, for a lot of people that are having to experience the violence. So I also want to point out, remember, Mars is ruling the ascendant in the first house and the sixth house of the health of the nation. And this is an article from today, as I'm recording this, June 15th, 2020. The second wave has begun. CNBC is quoting a Vanderbilt University School of Medicine doctor, and he's talking about the second wave of coronavirus. The Financial Times today is also reporting that global stocks are sinking now because there's new COVID cases in China and in the US. Those cases are on the rise. And so because this ingress chart what it's telling me is that the health of the people is really in focus because of Mars's importance in terms of which houses Mars rules, is that the lot of fortune is near the ascendant. The lot of fortune can be the materiality, right? And so we might look at that to say that the materiality of the people has this signature of being near the horizon during the moment of the ingress. That can be potentially beneficial. Also, the ascendant sends its power via trine to Mars. really kind of maybe mitigating some of the worst potential manifestations of Mars. And so I'm thinking that this might, be a signal that the protests that we're going to see over the summer are going to ultimately be beneficial for the people. And I have a question mark because, it's an unknown, but I'm thinking that this kind of mass movement can really rejuvenate and supercharge, reform in favor of the people at large. And to say there's a March on Washington scheduled for late August. This is the March on Washington 2. It's a redux of the famous March 1963 that MLK organized or famously spoke at. And so there's a real opportunity. That first March on Washington is a really significant standard bearer for ushering in a lot of the changes of the 60s. The sun in the North Node in this ingress chart are near Polaris, and Polaris is the guiding pole star. So it's the star that people that navigate ships would refer to help guide them. Boy Scouts are taught where the pole star is to know where north is and to situate themselves in their environment. I think this gives us the energy of this summer. Maybe it's guided. Maybe there's some guidance here to not have unrestrained martial energy, but rather it can be channeled to maybe a greater purpose. Also, Mercury conjoining Sirius, which I talked about on my last talk, it potentially gives us access to some occult knowledge and wisdom. And in this Cancer Ingress, Mercury is still tightly conjoined the fixed star Sirius. The other thing about Mercury and its condition in this chart is that it's in the degree of its retrograde station. It's in its own Egyptian term and in its own decan. So it's really powered up. But as it's retrograde and it's sort of moving backward, I think that the moment and this summer might have delayed impact, and that the effects of this summer are going to be unknown, and they might be unknown for a while. And so I'm seeing this more as a moment of intensity with a heavy martial flavor that we'll have to unravel, untangle, and process as the months and maybe potentially years go by. The other thing I want to point out is that Mars in the 5th house is really asking us to contemplate the spectacle of tumult. And that is to say, how is the violence that we see on the television screen, how is it being processed? How is it being delivered? Is it more about the spectacle, about creating a attention-grabbing event so that people can get sucked into their screens? Or is there an underlying purpose for what's happening that can be tapped into? And I think that this Mars in the 5th placement asks us to at least consider how much are we just getting high off of the news and off our Twitter feeds and social media feeds, and how much can we translate that into some tangible action? Saturn is in the 4th house of the Cancer Ingress as well, and the 4th house is public building and public spaces, right? It's the home of the community, and I'm wondering if the lockdown 2 might begin actually during this summer because of Saturn's placement in the 4th house. Saturn is also retrograde, which is the idea of returning or going back over things. This article from Real Clear Politics was published on June 12th. It's a really good article. It analyzes the TV coverage of the protests, and it shows that using Google search terms that people are more interested, again, this word spectacle. They want to see the shocking images rather than the underlying search terms of police brutality or violence or reform. Those are less important according to this analysis. And, it just underscores what I had said above about really trying to characterize and contemplate what this moment is actually for. And then, the New York Times came out with an article today, June 15th, 2020, warnings of renewed lockdowns in the U.S. in both New York and Texas. They're talking about new lockdowns. Beijing has now been put on a lockdown, parts of Beijing. So that Saturn in the 4th and the D.C. Ingress, I think, portends some of those future lockdowns. Cartomancy poll, 7 of clubs, Mars in Leo, the 3rd decan of Leo, the Vantage card. This is something that I think fits right in with the themes, and I'm not surprised it came up because, when we fight for position, sometimes it's a long and hard struggle to kind of get to a place where we can look out, kind of place ourselves above the fray, earn that high ground. This card is more about the fight, so it's asking us to be appreciative of the struggles that have been foisted upon us and that we've come through in order to earn the position that we're currently at. Mars in Leo is a fiery placement. It's fire on fire. And so this is not about mitigating the martial potentiality. It's actually about utilizing the passion, utilizing the even aggression if needed, and the kind of directness of interaction in order to win the position that you deserve. And I think that with the movements that we're going to see this summer, the protests, that this is a nice card to keep in mind, that we can fight for what we believe in, and we can be, fight with strength and fight with earnestness. You can book a donation-based astrology reading with me, sjanderson144.com. I look forward to reading for you. And you can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at sjanderson144.